G'day everyone, and a very warm welcome back. I'm Dr. Eleanor Taylor. Today, we're going to have a frank, open, and much needed conversation. We're diving headfirst into a topic that is simultaneously everywhere in our culture, and yet almost completely invisible in any real scientific discussion. It's a phenomenon that sparks immense curiosity, heated debate online, and let's be honest, has become the source of a whole lot of myths and performance anxiety. Female squirting. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? You see it portrayed constantly, and often, very unrealistically, in mainstream media and pornography, setting a kind of unspoken gold standard for female pleasure. Yet, when it comes to getting factual, reliable information, there's often just silence. It wasn't in your high school health class, and it's a topic many people feel far too awkward to even bring up with their doctor. This has created a massive knowledge vacuum, and that vacuum has been filled with misinformation, confusion, and a whole lot of pressure on women to experience something they may not fully understand, and on their partners to make it happen. My mission in this video is simple: to cut through all of that noise. I want to arm you with real, evidence-based knowledge so we can dismantle the myths together. We are going to replace fiction with physiology and replace pressure with genuine understanding. My goal is for you to walk away from this video feeling informed, empowered, and confident in your understanding of your own body or your partner's body, free from any script that society might have tried to write for you. So, before we dive into the fascinating study, I want to share with you where women themselves describe their own personal experiences. It is absolutely essential that we all start from the same solid foundation. We need a clear, no-nonsense definition. So, what exactly is squirting from a medical and anatomical perspective? In simple terms, it is defined as the involuntary expulsion of a noticeable amount of fluid through the urethra. That's the same tube that urine passes through, which can occur in some women during a state of intense sexual arousal, and often, but not always, in conjunction with an orgasm. Now, I know that the moment I say urethra, the first question that pops into nearly everyone's mind is, hang on a minute, doc. So is it just pee? That is a brilliant and logical question, and the scientific answer is actually far more complex and fascinating than a simple yes or no. And I promise you, we are going to get to the bottom of it. But to properly understand the what, we first need to understand the how and the where. The mechanism behind this incredible bodily function is a story of amazing anatomy. So, to kick things off, our first step is to take a brief but truly revealing tour of the internal female architecture. We need to look at the body's blueprint to understand how it all works. Are you ready to begin that journey of discovery? Let's get into it. To really get our heads around this mechanism, we need a map. Let's go on a quick expedition together into the incredible geography of the female pelvis. This isn't a dry anatomy lesson. This is about understanding the incredible wiring and plumbing of your own body. The first structure we need to identify is the urethra. Most of us know it as a simple one-way street, a small tube with the job of transporting urine from the bladder out of the body. That's its day job. But in the context of sexuality, the urethra sits at the epicenter of an incredibly complex and sensitive neighborhood. Now imagine surrounding and just beneath this urethra is a collection of glands and spongy tissue. And these are the real protagonists of our story, the Skene's glands. And here's a fact that surprises most people, including many medical students. The Skene's glands are, embryologically speaking, the direct cousins of the male prostate. Let me break down what that means, because it's genuinely amazing. In the very first weeks of a fetus's development, before sex characteristics are defined, we all start with the same basic parts. At a critical moment, this tissue comes to a biological fork in the road. If the fetus develops as male, that tissue becomes the prostate gland. If the fetus develops as female, that very same tissue develops into the Skene's glands. They are, in essence, two sides of the same biological coin. This is why the Skene's glands are sometimes referred to by anatomists as the female prostate. So, what is the most widely accepted scientific theory for how squirting happens? It's a staged process. As a woman becomes sexually aroused, a major physiological shift called vasocongestion occurs. Blood flow to the pelvic region increases dramatically, causing the genital tissues, including the clitoris and the spongy tissue around the urethra, to swell. It's believed that this increase in pressure and stimulation wakes up the Skene's glands, signaling them to begin producing and collecting a fluid. Imagine them like tiny reservoirs, slowly being filled. As arousal peaks and orgasm is imminent or occurring, a series of rhythmic, involuntary contractions of the pelvic floor muscles takes place. These powerful contractions create intense pressure on the whole area, squeezing the spongy tissue around the urethra. This pressure, in turn, compresses the now full Skene's glands, causing the fluid collected within them to be forcefully expelled out through the urethra. It's not magic. It's a purely physiological event, an incredible example of our body's engineering. Now that we have the anatomical map, it's crucial that we clarify a point that often causes a great deal of confusion. In everyday conversation, and even online, the terms squirting and female ejaculation are often used interchangeably. However, in the scientific and medical community, we tend to differentiate them as two potentially different phenomena based on what we know from lab analysis. Let's start with squirting. When researchers talk about squirting, they are generally referring to the expulsion of a large volume of fluid, anything from a few teaspoons to over a cup. This fluid is usually described as being clear, colorless, and with a very water-like consistency. And here's the answer to the big, "Is it pee?" question. Chemical analysis has given us a critical forensic clue. This fluid often contains components of urine, like urea and creatinine, but they are often far more diluted than typical urine. But here's the most fascinating part. Alongside those urinary components, scientists have found a very specific enzyme called PSA, prostate-specific antigen. Remember how we said the Skene's glands are the prostate's cousins? Well, PSA is the very enzyme that the prostate gland in men produces. Finding it in squirting fluid is the scientific fingerprint, the smoking gun evidence that confirms a significant part of the fluid originates in the Skene's glands. So the most accurate answer is, it appears to be a cocktail of secretions from the Skene's glands and a quantity of diluted urine from the bladder, likely pushed out by the intense pressure of orgasmic contractions. On the other hand, we have female ejaculation. This is often considered a separate event. It's described as the release of a much smaller amount of fluid, often just a few drops or up to a teaspoon. This fluid has a different appearance. It is typically thicker, whitish, and milk-like in appearance. It is believed that this fluid comes exclusively from the Skene's glands, without any mixture from the bladder. While research in this area is still very limited, a sad example of the gender data gap in medicine, some studies suggest that up to 40% of women report having experienced this type of ejaculation at some point. It's a powerful reminder of how much we still have to discover about the incredible diversity of female pleasure and physiology. All of this science is fascinating, but it leaves the most important question unanswered. Beyond the biology, what is this experience actually like? What do the women who experience it feel and think? This is where we run into a major problem. Historically, medical science has been very slow to explore aspects of female pleasure that aren't directly linked to reproduction. This huge knowledge gap hasn't just sat empty. Instead, it's been filled by non-scientific sources, most notably the pornography industry. As a result, a single, often exaggerated and unrealistic narrative has become the dominant story. A narrative that creates a performative script, putting pressure on both women and their partners. To begin filling that void with actual lived experiences, a brave group of researchers in Sweden decided to do the most logical thing: ask women directly. They designed a qualitative study, a type of research that focuses not on numbers and statistics, but on stories, feelings, and lived experiences. They recruited 28 women who self-identified as being able to squirt. They then conducted in-depth interviews with each one, creating a safe, non-judgmental space where these women could share their most intimate and private perceptions of their experience. They wanted to know, what does this mean to you? How does it affect your sex life? How does it make you feel about your body? What they found was not simple. It was complex, nuanced, and as diverse as the women they interviewed. The researchers were able to identify 3 major themes, 3 recurring currents of thought and feeling. These 3 distinct narratives give us an incredibly rich and human insight into this phenomenon, far beyond any simple clinical definition. And this is where the story becomes truly human and profound. The results of the study showed us that there is no one way to experience squirting. It is not a universal experience. The women's stories clustered into 3 main, sometimes even contradictory categories. Narrative 1, awe, pride, and a sense of sexual superpower. For a significant number of women in the study, discovering this ability was a turning point, a genuine sexual awakening. They described it as a journey of self-exploration. Some had actively sought to learn how to do it, using books, workshops, or with the help of partners who were very dedicated to providing them with that experience. Others realized it had happened to them in the past, but they'd never really paid attention to it until they focused on it consciously. The predominant feeling in this group was empowerment. They felt special, unique, almost like they had unlocked a new level, a new dimension of their own sexuality. It became a source of pride and sexual confidence. Narrative 2, indifference or a disconnection from orgasm. At the other end of the spectrum, other women felt the phenomenon was overrated. For them, it wasn't an earth-shattering event. Some didn't even realize it had happened at the time. They would simply notice it afterwards on the wet sheets. They didn't necessarily associate it with a more intense orgasm or a superior sexual experience. For this group, it was simply another bodily reaction, something that happened, much like blushing or sweating, but without an added emotional or pleasure-based charge. It wasn't good or bad, it simply was. And finally, narrative 3, feelings of inconvenience or shame. This is perhaps the most important finding for breaking the myths. A third group of women confessed to feeling negative emotions. They worried about the mess. They considered it an inconvenience or even dirty. Some, at first, didn't understand what was happening and felt a deep sense of shame, thinking they had wet the bed. They were genuinely embarrassed. The researchers concluded that these feelings didn't depend on the physical act itself, but on a complex cocktail of factors, the woman's own mindset about sex and bodily fluids, the reaction and acceptance of her partner, and, very powerfully, how the culture or society she lived in accepted or stigmatized explicit sexuality. So, what is the big takeaway from this entire journey of discovery? The fundamental take-home message I want you to leave with today is this: not everyone considers squirting to be the peak, amazing experience that we are often sold. The reality is that the feelings and perceptions can span the entire spectrum. For some, it is profoundly pleasurable and empowering. For others, it's completely indifferent. And for still others, it can be a source of anxiety or discomfort. And sometimes the very same person can feel all of these things at different times in their life, depending on the circumstance, the partner, and their state of mind. What you need to know, the liberating message I hope you'll remember, is that this is a completely normal physiological phenomenon. Some women experience it, many others do not. And this does not, under any circumstances, mean that one group is having a better or worse sexual experience than the other. Pleasure, connection, intimacy, and satisfaction are infinitely deeper and more personal concepts than any single physical manifestation. The diversity of human experience is what makes us unique. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. If you found value in this video, if it's answered a question or eased a worry, please don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with your friends. And as I always say, and will never tire of repeating, look after yourself, because you absolutely deserve it. Look after each other. See you next time.